What if the weapon America hopes will break Iran's defenses is already better understood in Tehran than in Washington? What if the real danger is not the swarm in the sky, but the quiet lesson Russia may have passed to Iran before that swarm ever arrived? If you like clear war analysis without the shouting, hit like, subscribe before the next turn in this story, and share this video with a friend who always wants the part nobody explains. In May, the Pentagon moved deeper into a plan that many people in defense circles have been waiting for. The plan centered on a low-cost attack drone called Lucas, and an autonomy system from Shield AI called Hivemind. On paper, it looks like the future. Small drones, cheap enough to build in large numbers, smart enough to work together, and dangerous enough to hit real military targets. That is the dream. Instead of firing a tiny number of very expensive missiles, the United States could launch wave after wave of low-cost aircraft and force Iran to burn through its defenses. If that works, it changes the math of war. If it fails, it reveals something much bigger. A major power can spend years building a new weapon and still walk straight into a defense problem its rival already solved. Lucas matters because it speaks to a problem Washington has been trying to escape. For years, Iran and the groups it supports have used cheap drones and rockets to force the United States and its partners into a terrible trade. A drone worth a few tens of thousands of dollars can trigger the launch of an interceptor worth millions. That is not just a military issue, it is an economic drain. Lucas is meant to flip that ratio. Reports describe it as costing around $35,000, flying roughly 500 miles, and carrying a warhead heavy enough to destroy radar sites, launchers, fuel storage, and other fixed targets. Launched one at a time, it is dangerous. Launched in large packs, it becomes a test of whether a defender can see everything, track everything, and kill enough of them before even a few get through. That is why the software matters. Hivemind is not just about remote control. The promise is that the drones can share data, react to losses, choose routes, and keep moving even when humans cannot guide every second of the mission. That sales pitch is powerful for a reason. America has plenty of exquisite weapons, but exquisite weapons are often expensive, slow to replace, and limited in number. A tomahawk can cost millions. A high-end air defense interceptor can cost even more. In a long fight, cost starts to matter almost as much as range or accuracy, so the appeal of Lucas is easy to understand. For the price of one or two traditional interceptors, you could send out a whole strike package of drones. If half are lost, the other half may still be enough. If only a few hit important nodes, the defender still pays a price much larger than the cost of the attack. This is why many officials and analysts talked about swarms as a turning point. They were not dreaming about one clever gadget. They were thinking about industrial warfare with software on top. Cheap mass, fast production, and enough autonomy to make large attacks manageable. In theory, that is exactly how you pressure a country that has relied on layered defenses, dispersed assets, and the hope that your enemy will run out of patience before you run out of targets. But there's a hard truth under the excitement, and it changes the whole picture. Lucas is not really shocking because it is new. It is shocking because it appears to borrow heavily from a weapon Iran already knows very well, the Shahed-style loitering drone. American engineers did not create the basic idea from nothing. The point was to study what Iran made, learn why it was cheap, learn how it reached targets over long distances, and then build an American version that could be fielded quickly. That sounds smart. Learn from the enemy, copy what works, turn it back on them. The problem is that a copied weapon carries inherited habits. It has design logic, flight behavior, strengths, and blind spots that do not disappear just because new software is added. And the country that built the original usually knows those blind spots before anyone else does. Iran understands the sound, shape, heat, speed, and final attack path of this type of drone not in theory, but from years of building, using, repairing, and improving it. That matters more than most headlines admit. When people hear the words artificial intelligence, they imagine something almost magical, as if software can erase the limits of a machine underneath it. Real warfare is less romantic. Software can improve decisions, but it cannot repeal physics. If an airframe is noisy, it stays noisy. If a drone flies a predictable final path, that path can still be trapped. If the body shape reflects radar in a familiar way, experienced defenders can still classify it faster. In other words, once America chose a drone family that Iran had helped pioneer, it also chose to fight inside a box Iran already understood. And then Russia added something even more important: recent battlefield experience. Over the last few years, Russia has watched Iranian-style drones fly over Ukraine, get tracked, get jammed, get fooled, and get shot down. That means Tehran did not just receive equipment from Moscow. It may have received a running notebook of what worked against these drones in real combat and what did not. That notebook could be worth more than a shipment of missiles. Think about how modern militaries learn. They do not need a perfect answer. They need enough layered answers that the attacker loses confidence. Reports about Russian support to Iran have pointed to electronic warfare systems, GPS deception tools, and short-range air defenses shaped for the drone age. Put that together, and a different story appears. The United States saw a cheap swarm as a way to overwhelm Iran. Russia may have helped Iran build a system designed to break the swarm's brain, bend its sense of direction, and clean up the survivors near the target. Start with electronic warfare. A swarm is strongest when its members can talk, update, and compare what they see. Even if each drone has some autonomy, the system becomes far more dangerous when those aircraft can pass target data, shift roles, and react together. That is where a strong jammer becomes a strategic weapon. Systems often linked to Russia, such as Krasuka-type jammers, are built to disrupt communications and complicate the use of satellite-based links across wide areas. You do not always need to destroy the drone itself. If you can cut or weaken the connections that make the swarm a swarm, you reduce it from a coordinated attack into many smaller problems. And that leads to the most misunderstood part of this entire debate. Jamming is bad for drones, but spoofing can be worse. Jamming says, I will block your signal. Spoofing says, I will give you the wrong signal and let you trust it. Imagine a smart driver using a map that has been quietly altered. The driver may still be alert, disciplined, and fast. None of that helps if the road data is false. A drone that depends on position data can face the same trap. A stronger fake GPS signal can trick onboard systems into thinking they are somewhere they are not. The autopilot then corrects its course based on a lie. The more confident the machine is in that lie, the more neatly it can fly away from the real target. This is the nightmare for any autonomy system. A smart drone acting on poisoned inputs does not become resistant. It becomes precisely wrong. And when several drones share that bad reference, the mistake can spread through the group instead of staying isolated in one aircraft. Supporters of the swarm concept answer this by saying the software was built for denied environments. That may be true to a point. Modern autonomy can use inertial navigation, stored terrain logic, visual cues, and pre-planned behavior even when outside links are cut. But there is a difference between surviving disruption and thriving inside it. A drone that can continue flying is not the same as a drone that can still coordinate perfectly, update targets in real time, avoid deception, and arrive in a dense defensive zone with full mission quality. Battlefields are not engineering brochures. If one part of the stack is degraded, the whole kill chain starts to wobble. The swarm loses timing. The approach angles become less flexible. The updates become stale. The defender gets more time. That extra time matters because Iran would not be relying on a single trick. It would be using multiple layers, each one buying seconds and confusion for the next. First, you blur the picture. Then you distort location. Then you force the surviving drones into a narrower, more predictable approach that other systems can exploit. Quick pause. If this is connecting dots you have not seen connected before, hit like, subscribe so you do not miss the follow-up, and share this video with someone who thinks the headline tells the whole story. Now add the physical defenses. Recent war has shown that countries adapt around critical infrastructure in surprisingly simple ways. Low-flying drones are dangerous because they come in cheap and low, but that same profile can become a weakness near the final seconds of impact. If a drone tends to approach low and fairly straight, cables, poles, nets, and blast barriers can force early detonation or deflect the body just enough to ruin the strike. That sounds crude, but crude is often enough. A refinery, power station, radar site, or missile storage area does not need a science fiction shield. It just needs to make the last stretch harder. A defender that has already cataloged the drone's engine note, infrared footprint, and radar return can cue those close defenses faster than a defender meeting the design for the first time. Then come the short-range, interceptors and gun missile systems waiting behind that obstacle belt. Russia has spent years adjusting air defense setups to deal with small drones, including mixes of radar, optical tracking, and cheaper interceptors for close-range work. Iran does not need every layer to be perfect. It only needs the layers together to raise the failure rate high enough that the economics of the swarm start to break. And this is where timing becomes deadly for Washington's plan. The swarm doctrine only works at swarm scale. If you have dozens, you do not have a true saturation weapon. You have a warning shot with a marketing campaign around it. Reports early in the rollout suggested America had far fewer operational Lucas drones than the public conversation implied. The factories, procurement, and fielding pipeline were still catching up to the concept. That gap matters because defenses do not wait politely for your production surge. Iran and Russia only had to prepare counters once they understood the direction of travel. America, by contrast, needed time to build numbers, train operators, refine software, and prove the system under real pressure. So one side was racing to scale a new offensive tool while the other side was racing to design the answer. If the answer matures first, the offensive advantage shrinks before it ever fully arrives. That is the hidden risk in every military revolution people celebrate too early. They count the promise of mass before mass exists, and they underestimate how quickly an opponent can turn observation into defense. There is also a less glamorous issue people skip because it sounds boring compared to artificial intelligence and drone swarms. Mass production is not just about building airframes. It is about engines, guidance units, warheads, launch systems, maintenance crews, secure software updates, test ranges, spare parts, and trained teams that know how to employ the drones under fire. A country can announce a billion-dollar push and still need many months before battlefield numbers reflect that promise. And even when the numbers arrive, quality can vary from batch to batch. Early production often reveals flaws that only appear under heat, dust, jamming, and field handling. Iran and Russia understand this because they have both relied on large numbers of relatively simple systems. They know quantity is never pure quantity. It must be usable quantity. So when people imagine thousands of drones solving the problem overnight, they are usually skipping the hidden labor between a factory order and a combat-ready force. War punishes those skipped steps. The calendar becomes a weapon all by itself. To be fair, there is still a serious argument on the other side. Pentagon planners are not fools. They know jamming exists. They know spoofing exists. They know a copied design can inherit weaknesses. The case for Lucas is not that it is unstoppable. The case is that it is good enough, cheap enough, and scalable enough to force Iran into a losing exchange over time. Even if electronic warfare disrupts part of the swarm, some drones may still leak through. Even if the first versions struggle, later batches can be updated. Even if Iran protects top-tier infrastructure, many second-tier targets may remain exposed. They could also mix drones with decoys, missiles, cyber attacks, or strikes timed to exhaust air crews. The point of a swarm is not that every drone hits. The point is that the defender must solve too many problems at once. In this view, the battlefield is a testing ground. Early losses are painful, but they teach the attacker how to adapt faster than the defender can rebuild. That logic should not be dismissed. In long wars, iteration can matter more than elegant first impressions. Many decisive systems looked messy in their first combat use, but the hardest problem for that argument is not technology, it is sequence. Iran does not need to win a design contest for the next 5 years. It needs to blunt the weapon now, while America is still ramping production and trying to preserve scarce missile stocks. The country that holds out during the awkward early phase can reshape the political phase that follows. And there is another limit software alone cannot erase. If the airframe's approach pattern is known, if its sensors are limited, if its navigation can be stressed, if the battlefield data feeding the autonomy is manipulated, then every update still rides inside a vulnerable physical shell. You cannot patch your way out of every structural weakness. This is why Russia's role matters so much. Moscow did not need to give Iran some magical superweapon. It only needed to shorten Iran's learning curve. Years of observing drone warfare in Ukraine gave Russia a rare library of evidence about how these systems behave under stress. What frequencies get targeted, what signatures stand out, how low-cost drones react when links degrade, how defenders can combine electronic pressure with kinetic pressure. Handing that experience to Iran is like giving a student the answer key before the exam starts, not because the student no longer has to work, but because the student now knows exactly where the traps will be. Once you see that, the strategic consequences widen fast. Lucas was supposed to solve more than one battlefield problem. It was supposed to reduce the burden on America's premium missile inventory. That matters, because missile stockpiles are not magical pools that refill overnight. Every launch has a replacement timeline, a production cost, and an industrial bottleneck behind it. If cheap drones can do part of the strike mission, expensive missiles can be saved for targets that truly require them. But if the cheap drones are being jammed, diverted, trapped, or shot down at a high rate, then the pressure returns to the old tools. Use more costly missiles, or strike less often. Neither choice is attractive. One drains resources, the other weakens coercion. A threat only works if the other side believes you can sustain it. If Iran sees the low-cost option underperforming and the high-cost option thinning out stockpiles, it reads not just a tactical problem, but a shrinking margin of American freedom. There is a second layer to the stockpile problem that makes the Lucas gamble even more risky. Once commanders become emotionally invested in a cheap system, they tend to plan around the future performance they hope to have, not only the performance they can prove today. That creates temptation. You delay the use of premium missiles because you want the drones to take over more of the burden. But if the drones are still being neutralized in large numbers, the delay itself can carry a cost. Targets survive longer. Defenders reposition. Repair crews work through the night. Mobile launchers move again before the next strike window. So the issue is not only how many missiles America has left, it is whether faith in a coming drone solution slows decisions in the present. Wars are full of moments like that. Moments when an emerging weapon becomes more useful as a concept than as a reality, at least for a while. And that gap between concept and reality is where strategy can quietly go wrong. Now connect that to the Gulf. The Strait of Hormuz is one of those narrow places that can shake the whole planet. A huge share of the world's seaborne oil passes through that corridor. If Iran can keep coastal radars alive, keep anti-ship systems intact, and keep enough patrol and strike capacity in play, then pressure on global energy markets stays high. The drone swarm was supposed to help break that web by suppressing the pieces that make closure or intimidation believable. If the swarm cannot reliably do that, the economic shock lingers. Oil traders do not care about optimistic talking points. They care about whether ships are safe, whether missiles can still reach them, and whether the military balance near the water has actually changed. So this story is not just about one drone model and one countermeasure suite. It spills into fuel prices, insurance rates, shipping decisions, inflation, and domestic politics, far from the battlefield. There's another reason this matters far beyond the immediate battle. American power in the region depends not only on what it can destroy, but on what partners believe it can protect. Gulf states, shipping companies, insurers, and regional militaries all watch the same signals. If the United States cannot quickly suppress the systems that threaten the strait, allies start adjusting their own behavior. Some hedge. Some talk more quietly to rivals. Some invest faster in local defenses because they no longer trust distant promises to work on schedule. Deterrence erodes that way. Not always with a dramatic collapse, but with many small revisions and private calculations. And those revisions are strategic gold for Iran. Every extra doubt inside an allied capital is another form of pressure without firing a shot. So a drone campaign that underperforms does more than waste hardware. It can thin the political aura that makes military power effective in the first place. Before we land the last point, do this like a field report relay. Press like, join the channel by subscribing, and send this to one group chat, where people argue about wars after reading only the first paragraph. And then comes the most human part of strategy, credibility. Negotiations are never separated from battlefield performance, no matter how politely diplomats speak. If Iran believes it can absorb drone attacks at an acceptable cost, it has less reason to compromise quickly. If it believes America built its campaign around a weapon that looked better in presentations than in combat, it can harden its terms. In strategy, a bluff becomes visible when the other side sees the cost behind your options. A nation that has to choose between burning scarce missiles and accepting limited effect from cheaper drones does not negotiate from the same emotional position as a nation that feels escalation is easy. That is why the phrase, answer to the swarm, matters. An answer does not have to mean total immunity. It only has to mean enough resistance to convince the attacker that easy leverage is gone. Once that happens, the political mood changes, threats sound less sharp, deadlines look less frightening, public messaging becomes louder because military certainty becomes thinner. And that may be the real gift Russia handed Iran. Not perfect protection, but the confidence that Washington's newest tool can be managed, studied, and absorbed rather than simply feared. This is also why public celebration can become misleading. When a government unveils a new weapon, it highlights the successful clips, the clean animations, the official statements, and the promise of scale. What it rarely shows is the invisible tax of failure, the missions aborted by interference, the aircraft that never found the right target, the strikes that landed meters offline, the decoys that consumed precious drones, and the revisions made in a rush after each disappointing sortie. None of that means the system is useless. It means the true measure of the weapon is not the best video you can release. It is the average result across many contested missions. And average results are exactly what sophisticated states try hardest to hide when a signature system becomes politically important. So how do you watch this story without getting lost in propaganda from either side? Look for silence as much as claims. If officials celebrate every successful strike but become vague when asked about swarm results, that tells you something. Watch whether language shifts from precision and success to disruption and pressure. Those are not the same words. Watch the market reaction around Hormuz. If energy risk stays elevated, traders are telling you the coastal threat is still alive. Watch whether Iran's public position softens after new drone strikes or stays stubborn. A confident defender usually talks like one. Do not judge only by viral strike clips. Any military can release selective footage. Ask instead whether the tempo rises, whether target types broaden, and whether the defender's core infrastructure actually loses function for long periods. And most of all, remember the bigger lesson. Modern war is no longer just a contest between weapon and armor. It is a race between adaptation cycles. One side introduces a new tool. The other side studies it, copies parts of it, jams it, spoofs it, traps it, and builds cheaper answers around it. The side that learns fastest often matters more than the side that started richest. In that kind of contest, a flashy system can lose value very quickly if its opponent understands it deeply enough before mass deployment arrives. And this is why the easiest mistake is to confuse invention with advantage. Building a new platform matters. Announcing a contract matters. Showing a few successful strikes matters. But none of those things by themselves settle the contest. Advantage comes when a weapon can survive contact, scale faster than the counter, and keep shaping the enemy's choices after the surprise is gone. If the counter arrives first, or if the counter is cheaper, then the glamour fades very fast. That is what may be happening here. The swarm still matters, the software still matters, but the side that understood the weaknesses first may matter more. In the end, this is why the title of this story hits so hard. America may have believed it found the answer to Iran's drone playbook by building its own version and adding smarter software. But if Russia helped Iran understand how to blind that software, confuse that navigation, and exploit the inherited weaknesses of the design, then the supposed answer became a test, and tests reveal who prepared first. The deepest irony is simple. America tried to turn Iran's logic against Iran. Russia may have turned that move back again. If that is true, then the real battle is not about one swarm. It is about who gets to define the next stage of warfare before the other side catches up. And right now, that question is still very much alive.